let's worry about it when they die. Has anybody died? No, nobody died. Well, then we'll talk about it. And of course, you can set up the planning. And I've had a couple people like that where they've fretted, oh my gosh, this has happened, that's happened. You say, no, you're really in compliance. And or the account's under $10,000 or some other reason. Yeah. But generally speaking, it's better to file the forms if you can.
Okay. Well, before I get into a lot of other details, you mentioned this, I think they call it the FBAR Compliance Initiative or something like that, this new IRS program. Maybe you can talk about that.
Well, it's a pretty broad amnesty program for all which includes quite a few of the forms that if they've not been filed, and if before the end of is it July
August,
or August?
It's
August
31st.
Right, August 31st.
2011. I'm sorry.
Right. If by the end of August you can voluntarily come in under this amnesty program, and what they'll want, but it's a little tricky. It's rather mechanical in the way that it's applied. And what you're doing in essence, if you feel that you have, whatever you have done would actually constitute criminal activity, you should probably take a look at the amnesty program, because it's very similar to going in for a traffic ticket and pleading no contest, saying, okay, which is in essence saying you're guilty. And what they'll want you to do is give them an 8-year look back to 2002, file all your tax returns reporting the additional income you should have, pay all the penalties, including any kind of negligence penalties for that whole period. Then they will take a look at the highest balance you had offshore, and you will pay them 25% of that balance as a penalty. In order to apply for the amnesty program, if you're already in their criminal system, if they have you detected somehow, for instance, you had a UBS account, it's been disclosed to them, they have not done anything about it, but you're already in their system, you're not eligible for amnesty. Or if somehow or other they know that you're on their list, you cannot do the amnesty. So there is a quick check way. There's a way to check quickly to see if you're even eligible for the amnesty. And again, if you have any extenuating circumstances, or if you'd like to plead your case or anything else like that, the IRS says no, there's no leeway. It's just this mechanical thing. They do have lower penalties. Instead of 25%, they've got a 12.5% one where if your balance was less than $75,000 or less, they'll only take 12.5%. And they also have one that's only a 5% penalty, but it's pretty hard to qualify for these facts. And it'd be a situation where you didn't realize you're a U.S. citizen, say. You've been living abroad, born of U.S. parents. Maybe you were born of Chinese parents, but born in San Francisco, and then you went to China, grew up in China, never knew you were technically a U.S. citizen and had a filing requirement. If you want to come clean on that, it's only a 5% penalty. Kind of hard to fit in those facts. Yeah. But those penalties may be grossly unfair in certain situations, and it would include the 3520. And I saw in the last amnesty program, another lawyer called me up and said, you have a client that never filed the 3520 forms because he had a Mexican trust holding the title to his condominium down in Ensenada.
Yes.
And I said, well, what's the balance in the account? He said, about $100. So he'd been understating his interest income by $3 a year.
Yes.
I said, well, just go under to the amnesty and they'll waive the penalties for the late filed 3520. Well, what they didn't tell me was that at one time within the last 6 years, this guy had put $200,000 in the account in a construction payment, and so the IRS under the last plan got 20% of the balance, so he had to pay $40,000 penalty.
Oh my gosh.
I would not have necessarily advised him to go into the amnesty program in that situation. I'd want to know more about what was going on about that, because sometimes if you will get your accounts brought up to date and in the system, and you're paying your income taxes and you're filing your FBARs, and you're really kind of you're doing everything right.
Reformed citizen.
You kind of, it's kind of like you've repented. You've seen the light. You've repented. You want to go. You want to be forgiven and go and sin no more. To a certain extent, if it's not anything onerous that you've done out there, and you get yourself into the system, that may be an answer as opposed to the amnesty thing. Here, I'll give you an example. I have a client that had let's say $10 million in California municipal bonds,
Yes.
and he transferred them to his Charles Schwab account in Hong Kong,
Yes.
not realizing that Charles Schwab account in Hong Kong is a foreign bank account. Just
Yes.
like Bank of Hong Kong account in San Francisco is a U.S. bank account. Well, that Charles Schwab account in Hong Kong with 10 million, municipal bond income is not taxable in the U.S.
Right.
or California. He had no taxable income, but he put 10 million in. If he went into amnesty, he'd have to pay $2.5 million penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, that
Yeah.
seems a little too much.
Yeah.
I would not go into amnesty on that one. I would say, I'd file the FBAR, and if you prove it was just negligent, you weren't. How in the world? I mean, you'd say, I'm not trying to avoid income tax. I mean, these are municipal
Yeah.
bonds.
Yeah.
It was just a mistake,
Uh-huh.
and they'd just hit you with a $10,000 penalty. But if you went into amnesty, you got the 25% penalty applying.
So
You don't want to do that.
So some people, particularly like you said, if you've got this concern about criminal type
Right.
of issues, in that situation, you'll probably want to go get covered under this amnesty program. But there may be some situations where you may want to take an alternative approach,
Right,
sort of
right.
go hand in hand to the criminal investigation division and say, is there another way that we can work this thing out?
Right.
Okay.
Now I'll tell you another interesting situation you might be find interesting to hear about. I've just gotten a client who was an individual disclosed to the IRS by Union Bank of Switzerland, UBS, and he has gotten notice from an IRS auditor right here in San Jose that he's being audited under the civil program of audits.
Yes.
Now, this auditor is a very, very experienced auditor. And he has almost as many years of experience as I do, that's a lot of time he's been doing this stuff. I've been doing it. I said, I've been doing this stuff 40 years. He said, I've been doing it 39.
Okay.
Very charming.
Yes.
And I try to be very charming as well. So we're really charming each other.
All these charming people.
But frankly, he's looking for anything that would smell, taste like, or hint of criminal activity.
Yes.
So we're trying to be completely cooperative and fully disclosing, paying all the tax, and do everything wonderful. But we have to be very careful that there's nothing there that could in any way, shape, or form be considered criminal. Now, fortunately, my client is just the sweetest, nicest guy in the world, and this is an account he inherited. He was born in a foreign country, and he came here. His mother, who had lived in the foreign, set up an account for him.
Yes.
At UBS, never told him he even had the account until 2008. As soon as she told him that numbered account was his, he immediately brought it in the U.S., paid all his taxes, everything. So I do not want him in the criminal system. But I got to be really careful because we're skating on ice. And one of the things the auditor told me, he says, too bad he didn't go in the amnesty program because it would have been a fixed amount, 20%. But gee, it was a big account, it's a $2 million account. Does he really want to pay $400,000 penalty? When in fact the guy he's so innocent. And he did file a 3520, by the way. I don't know if he did the FBAR, but my guy's got really good facts. And so I'm hopeful that audit will turn out okay.
Yeah.
But it's a little tricky. There has to be some professional judgment there. I like to work with the CPA on that. So if the CPA sends somebody over because the person needs to talk to a lawyer, we'll kind of work it through and say, these are the alternatives. You do this path or that path. And frankly, there's a lot of work for the CPA if you're going to go back 8 years, file all the amended returns, pay all the tax, all the penalties. The CPA does all that work. And so it's good off-season work for the CPA. The poor clients has got the problem. Yeah.
Well, maybe you should talk a little bit about, so when is it maybe more appropriate to talk mostly to an attorney about this stuff as opposed to a CPA?
Well, if it's your Mexican trust, old property and stuff like that's okay, But if it's something where you knew you had this account for several years, you didn't report the income, you should probably have the attorney-client privilege protect you, and then you can tell the attorney everything, and the attorney he can't turn a person in, you can't disclose it. And what I've done is, I've like this lady that was going to inherit some property from her mother. I said, you don't really need to worry so much, but they can kind of spill their guts. and then the lawyer, and I have a network of fellows. We kind of share this information and find the practical approach. And sometimes you have an answer, say, this is the by the book answer. But frankly, if you do this, that, or the other, it should work out for you, but I can't guarantee it. And I don't want you to sue me for malpractice if it doesn't. But what the IRS wants more than anything else, get you into the system and don't be, and be in full compliance, full disclosure. But if you were doing a scheme where you were saying you'd go to Europe or Asia and do contract work, and have all your paychecks put into a foreign bank account, and then you'd never bring the money in here, never report it, but every time you traveled, you dap in that stuff. That's criminal, and so you got to be careful. You got a big problem.
Okay, let's say somebody, one of our viewers, receives an IRS letter inquiring whether they should file one of these information returns. What should they do?
Well, that one again, I think that you might want to talk to an attorney. If somebody practices in this area, you got to be you got to be careful. You could stumble into it. Once again, like I was telling you, they want to be tipped off that you're doing something criminal, and so before you just willy-nilly answer the thing, you should see if you're setting yourself up for possible criminal prosecution. Because, as you know, I mean, you don't want to be in Leavenworth or Lompoc, I guess they send them down to here in California. You don't want to be there doing gardening.
No.
Yeah.
Now, let's see here. Okay, so what about this issue? Maybe we should sort of confront that, and we sort of alluded to it. That they're saying that tax return preparers may not be able to do work for their clients if they don't comply with this stuff.
That's really painful. Now, the AICPA, thankfully, has a strong lobby, and they work on the government. And I think that as time goes by, the liaison there has done a lot for the CPA world and the tax preparer profession. But I think, I have a personal opinion, but I think it's just overreaching. It's just way, way too far. And now I have to say this as well. Unfortunately, many CPAs are not aware of the 3520, the FBAR, and so on and so forth. It's not, fortunately, with the Schedule B, it helps a bit, but they're focused on doing a 1040, and they're cranking out 1040s. And these other areas are just so far afield, and it's too arcane. In fact, I wrote an article that was published in the Daily Journal on this, that it's just too complicated nowadays to keep track of 5471s, 5472s, 986s, 8850, the 3520, all these forms, and none of them are tied to the 1040, and you're going nuts with it. And so if you inadvertently don't file, I'd see that's very common. I've seen a lot of those.
And you could be disciplined. Basically, you can lose your license.
You lose your license, and you don't even know what hit you. You're blindsided.
Yeah.
And I think that they're putting too much. Frankly, I like the lobbying efforts to get them to back off on
so
that.
hopefully they can back up.
Yeah. Which they did on some things. They have
down.
On
Recently.
the
Okay. Well, I think actually we're about out of time.
Oh, well.
So mostly, I want to thank you, David, for
my pleasure,
being my guest.
Sure.
Glad to have you here, and
Yeah.
hopefully we'll get together, maybe talk about another subject another time.
Sure.
Anyway, but I wanted to get together with David because of particularly this initiative that the IRS has to give people some notice and take action. These opportunities don't come up all the time. We don't know what else is going to be coming down the pike with the IRS. But on the other hand, be aware that you may have alternatives, and there are people like David, attorneys that deal with this area that can help you. So I think with that, I'll just say thank you for joining us, and I hope we'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.